So, are you still talking with fonts? Hi, welcome to Crafts by Two. I'm Ken, and this is George. So this is part 2 in our series of font art for Inkscape, and we're doing grouped text this time. Like we said before, this is something that you can do in Design Space, but we really need to know how to do this in Inkscape so we can build on it for some other cool techniques like the layered text. Don't forget, we have reference sheets for all of our projects, so you don't have to keep pausing the video and playing it over and over. Use the reference sheet to follow along. For most people, they're not that confusing. So group text really builds on the basic manipulation that we covered in our first video in the series, and it's actually just a few quick steps. But there's some problems you can encounter with Inkscape, because it's a little quirky sometimes. So we cover those in this video. When you try to bring an SVG you saved into Design Space, and it complains that there's text elements, we'll show you what to do. So let's hop in now and look at group text in Inkscape. Back in Inkscape again. Let's get started creating some grouped font art and actually making an SVG we can take into Design Space or any other system that supports cutting SVG files. For this one, I'm just going to create a quick happy birthday sentiment. I'm going to go over here to the text tool and click and type in happy and then birthday. Two things here. Remember, we want to just use the text tool and click to make regular text, not flowed text by clicking and dragging. The other thing is you'll see that I did happy and birthday as separate objects because I kind of want to stack them and move them around, and that's going to be easier when I start shifting and using movement and rotation to have them separate so I can arrange those appropriately. I want to change them both, so I did a quick click and drag to lasso around them and select both. Another way you can select everything on the screen is going to the Edit menu and do Select All. So this font isn't quite what I'm looking for this sentiment. So I'm coming up to Text, Text and Font, and I'm going to browse my collection and see what my options are. I think I like this Rockwell Extra Bold. It's big and chunky, and when you're making grouped font art like this, you want to have something that's a little more chunky so you can kind of mix it together and get that sentiment or text looking really good when you cut it out of a piece of paper. And I'm just going to boost that font size up a little bit more and click Apply and Close. So there's my words. I can click and drag things around, and I don't really need to position them just yet because now I want to start manipulating them. Using the techniques from our first video, I'm just going to start rotating and moving things around. Today, I'm on the Mac instead of Windows, so unfortunately I can't do the Option square bracket to rotate the text. I have to use the menu bar up top. But I can do the Option arrow to move things around. So I'm just kind of jumbling things up a little bit. And what I'm doing is just kind of rotating and positioning things. You'll see how when I've rotated things, I might have to move things around a bit and just try to close those gaps where the text isn't quite overlapping nicely. And that looks pretty good, but I don't like over here where the A and the H have that little space. So I'm just selecting what I've got so far and using that Option or Alt arrow keys to move things over. So I think the happy looks pretty good there. Now let's start playing with the birthday. This time I decided just to rotate things all around first a little bit to get that jumble. Now I can do all my bunching up all at once. So I'm just clicking and dragging to select and moving some stuff around. And I'm just doing things like keeping an eye on the feet here to make sure that there's no sharp edges or weirdness. And just trying to group it all together to have kind of a nice cut when I do all this. And I think just to kind of give this a little bit of different shape, I want to swing the Y around, just to kind of bring it together visually. Not sure I like that gap, but can you still tell that's an A and a Y? Not sure about that. Let me try something else. That's not working quite out with them both rotated in the same direction. So I think that worked out. And now I'm just going to bring them together. Just kind of eyeballing it to get them centered together. I could actually use some of the tools within Inkscape, but for now I'm just eyeballing it. So a few things I did here is I overlapped things. So things like the I is going to be cut with the H, so I don't have a little hanging piece for the I, because my goal with this was to make it all one piece. And zooming in, I can see there's some spots I can make some improvements. Like here, there's this kind of weird little notch where the T and the H overlap and the I and the R overlap. So let's try to fix some of those. Before I do that, let me show you how I zoomed. Some quick keys, you can use the plus and minus on the keyboard to zoom in and out. If you press 4, it'll zoom in on the art that you've got in your document right now, and that will give you a really nice view if you don't have much going on in your art. Or, if you press 5, that'll zoom out and show you your whole document all at once. So let's hop back in using 4 to zoom in on my art, and now I can start trying to correct some of these little problems. So let's go back to the text tool, select that R, and holding down the Alt key and using the arrows, just moving things around to get some better edges. Because I moved the R over so much, I need to kind of jostle things a little bit more here. So I think that's better for the I and the R and the T and the H. So I think we're good there, but now we just need to rearrange things. So zooming back out, using the shortcut of 5 on the keyboard, I can then grab the birthday and move things around a little again. Okay, I think that's good. So let's pop in with 4 on the keyboard for a shortcut. Now I lose the I. So let's bring this all back down. Not happy with how the I and the B are working out, so let's try moving those over a little bit more. So again, using the text tool, and then selecting my text. Just using those keyboard shortcuts to move things around. Still not happy. So let's bring the A and the Y up. to kind of balance out that shape a little. Okay, I think that's good. So let's zoom in again. Just a quick explanation of why we need to take the following steps. If we go to the node pointer tool, the node shows us the paths and the nodes that make up shapes in Inkscape. Right now though, if we click on this, it's just showing us this single box, and these aren't actually shapes. This is what's called a text element. And if we saved it as an SVG at this point and brought it into Design Space, it's going to warn us that there's unsupported text elements in our image that aren't going to cut properly. We need to take just a few more steps to save this as an SVG with proper paths that are going to cut. I'm going to use that shortcut of Edit, Select All, to select everything on the screen. And now I'm going to go up and say Path, Object to Path, and this really didn't do much. It just kind of gave a little adjustment to our selection boxes. If we switch over to the node tool, as I mouse over things, you can see here, like the H and the A, they overlap, and when I move the node tool from one to the other, the red lines overlap each other. If we saved it at this point in Design Space, it's actually going to cut those red lines. So it's going to cut this straight edge of the H out of the A, and it's going to cut the curve of the A out of the H. And that's not what we want. We want this to be one big cut. So just a few more steps. We're going to come up here to Object and say Ungroup, and now everything is an individual piece instead of those two big boxes for the two words. And it's even clearer now, if we select multiple things, where all those red lines are, and all this is going to cut out of everything else. All these overlaps are going to be cut out, and we don't want that. That's going to be a mess. So now we go up to the path and say Union. Now you can see all these overlaps are now solid pieces. Right here between the A and the H, there's this big open space because this is all going to be one continuous piece of black. And same here with the P's and the Y, and then down here to these other parts. Now I'm going to go through all of these last steps in order. I want to select all of my text by going to Edit and Select All. Then go to Path, Object to Path. Then I want to go to Object and choose Ungroup. And while everything's still selected, I go to Path and say Union. Before I save this, one quick tip. When you're working in Inkscape, it doesn't care where you're working. I can drag this over and work over way over here on the side, and Inkscape doesn't mind. But if I go to save this and take it into Design Space, it's going to show up as a blank image. And the reason for that is because this square you see here in my document is called the page. If I jump over to the page, it's empty. And that's how Design Space is going to see it when I bring this document into Design Space. Even though I've got my art over here, the page is empty. So you always want to make sure that you have your art on the page. It doesn't matter where. It can be in the corner, it can be in the bottom, it can be in the center. It doesn't matter. As long as it's on the page, Design Space is going to be able to bring it in properly. And you want to be careful. You don't want something hanging off the page, because if I brought this into Design Space, it's going to be Happy Birthday, because the Y is off the page. So just make sure your art is centered in the page and you're ready to go. I can then come up to the File menu and do Save. and I like to make sure I'm saving things to the desktop so I can find them easily, and I can call it Happy Birthday Font Art. And down below you can see I can choose a file type, and in this case I want to make sure I'm doing a plain SVG file. Inkscape SVGs will come into Design Space most of the time. I've actually never had an issue, but to be better safe than sorry, a plain SVG is pretty much guaranteed to work in Design Space and any other software that supports SVG files. So I've given it a name, I've set it to be a plain SVG, and I save. Now I can switch over to Design Space and upload that image. So vector upload, and here's my art, and there we go. Save my image and bring it in to my project. And just like any other item, I can drag it to resize it and cut. On the preview, it looks like it's going to cut great. Another thing you can do is, instead of cutting it, you could also just write it. I can come over here and select it on my layers and change it from cut to write. Now it's going to be kind of a fun outline. Your font art can be pretty versatile. One thing you might encounter when trying to bring your font art into Design Space is that text elements warning I mentioned earlier. If you do a vector upload and select your image, you'll see this warning pop up at the top that the uploaded SVG contains items that are not supported, such as autoflow text or text elements. So what can you do about that? Switching back to Inkscape, I don't see anything. I've made this into my outlines, my paths. Everything looks good. If I go under Edit and select all, nothing's there. This comes from a little bug with Inkscape. If you accidentally did flowed text, like I click and drag with the text tool, and I have my box, and I'm like, oops, that's not what I wanted, and I just click, that flowed text goes away. But it's still there as far as Inkscape is concerned. Even if I go back and do select all, nothing shows up here where I did the flowed text, but it's still hidden in the document. So even if I save, it's still going to be there. A quick way to fix that is to come back to your document, click on your text object once to select it, so that's all you've got selected, and then go to the Edit menu and copy it, and then just quickly open up a new document. And in your new document, you can paste, going Edit and Paste, and here's my happy birthday again. So if I save this, I can even replace my bad file. Now if I try that new one where I just copied and pasted my text sentiment alone, everything imported just fine with no warnings. So don't get frustrated if you get those warnings. Just try that quick little copy and paste trick. You might have just accidentally left some text element in the document that Inkscape thinks is there, but it's just not showing you that it's there. Now we're well on our way. You've created a grouped font art and saved it as an SVG to bring it into Design Space or whatever program you're using to cut your SVG files. Like we said at this point, all of these are tasks you could have done in Design Space if that's the program you're using. Now we have the foundations to create some really cool stuff. Our next video is going to show you how to make matted layers so you can kind of do those 7D zoom text effects that just look really good when you're doing your paper layers. So it's a lot of work not talking? Well, maybe more willpower than work for some people. So don't forget to give our videos a thumbs up. It really helps us get a bigger audience, and we appreciate the feedback. Don't forget, we have reference sheets for all this.